All right, welcome to the July 28th, 2020 Club Cubase Google Hangout. We'll get started here in just a couple minutes. I'm going to do a quick audio test. Bear with me just a second. And we'll be letting people get logged in here momentarily. Okay, my name is Greg Ondo. I work with Yamaha Corporation of America as a Steinberg specialist based in the United States. I am broadcasting from outside of Washington, D.C. area in Alexandria, Virginia. How the Hangouts work is people can submit questions in advance by sending them to clubcubase@steinberg.de, or you could ask the questions in the live chat field during the Hangout. We'll try to go through these chronologically. So if you get your question in earlier, you have a higher chance of getting it answered within the Hangout. There's really not a need to ask the same question repeatedly. That won't increase the odds of your question getting answered. So if we could try to avoid asking the same question, it just kind of clogs up the chat feed. And sometimes I just don't need, if we've covered something already, we don't need to cover it because there will be the live chat will be ahead of all the questions that we get to cover. So, and if you could, while asking questions, sometimes it can make a big difference depending which version of Cubase. So if it's possible maybe to indicate I'm running Cubase Artist on Mac or Cubase Pro on Windows or Cubase AI, that's also helpful and can cut down on a lot of speculation. So that would be great. If you're watching this live, please feel free to introduce yourself. If you're watching the restream of this afterwards, you can maybe skip ahead to 8 or 10 minutes. We'll try to have the index for today's Hangout with all the topics covered posted later tonight or early tomorrow morning. So we should be able to quickly look through all the different questions that were covered and kind of navigate to specific timestamps. So, and let's go ahead and see who's getting logged in. And it's great to see so many people. We're going to let people get logged in. We have people kind of throughout the world. So let different people get logged in. And feel free to introduce yourself. And we'll get started here in just a few minutes. Like many of you, during the pandemic, I have my family at home, so you may hear my wife above me on conference calls and maybe walking. And my son is also home, so in about an hour, I may have to get a TV show on for him. So I'll apologize in advance for any interruptions, but just want to give you kind of a heads up with that. Then we'll try to go for 3 or 4 hours today and see how many questions we could get answered. So let's go ahead and see who's present on the Hangout. All right, so we have Brazil checking in. Excuse me. Okay, we have Indonesia, Stockholm. Good to see Jan. We have Yorkshire, UK. I hope it's pronounced Yorkshire. In America, we'd probably say Yorkshire, so it doesn't quite seem right for somewhere in the UK. All right, so we have Pinder. He's based in the UK as well, I believe. Okay. Okay, he's just seeing question on Stream Deck. Okay, so we see Ambient Day. We got on the Hangout early. It's great to see you. All right, so we have Hampshire in the UK. All right, so Jonathan from the UK as well. Millard Brown from outside Philadelphia. All right. Okay, so let's go ahead. You see Agent K is on. We see Jazz Dude is on at the start. It's great. All right, so we have Kenosha. We have Pablo. It's good. We have Romania. Okay, so it's Yorkshire. All right. All right. We have South Shields, England. We see Gareth on. All right, so we have Kevin from New Jersey. Lived in New Jersey for a bit when I was working in New York at studios in Nutley area. All right, so Agent K's on. All right. Okay, so we'll just maybe about 2 or 3 more minutes, get started. Get more people logged in, and we'll be having our next hangout this upcoming Friday. Okay, so we'll let more people getting logged in. So just see a quick question. Am I using the Pro version for these Hangouts? Yes, that's the version that I'll be running for the Hangouts today. All right, so Daryl from Fort Washington, Maryland, basically right across the river from me. Welcome, Daryl. Good to see you on a Hangout again. Okay, maybe in our 2 minutes and get started. All right, so we have Vinny from Orlando. So Ambient Dave's put in a long work week, 50 hours. Okay. So I know a couple people were saying start tutorial, please. We're just going to wait a couple minutes, get more people logged in. So if you could just bear with us, maybe another minute to 30 seconds to a minute. We'll get started right at 10 minutes after the hour. All right, so Berkshire. All right, so we have Scotland, Malta. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I will just kind of scroll back in my timeline. All right, so I see what's the best workflow for contacting Cubase using a drum kit, how to properly split each instrument in different tracks so we can do individual pan and volume settings, suggestions and tips. I don't have Contact installed and I don't use it that much. But I could show you something similar in Groove Agent. So, in which will probably be applicable. So let's come over here. If I wanted to have a drum kit, we could just pop over to Groove Agent SE. I will go ahead and just load a quick kit. And every instrument will have kind of different settings for how to activate outputs. And I think Contact may have like, a 16 out, 8 out, 2 out, different versions, something like that. But if you actually just kind of click right here on the instrument itself, if the whatever output channels, you could activate all of the outputs. So within Groove Agent, I could have 32 stereo outs, and I could just activate these outputs there. And when I go to the mixer, and this would be different for every single instrument, I can now say I want the kick to go out of output 1, and let's say my snare out of output 2. So you could just kind of come here, say, so now as we see our multiple outputs here, I could just say, let's put the hi-hat to output 3. Let's say overheads to output 4, and broom mics to output 5. And this way you could have kind of individual control. So that's the snare if you wanted to just, so let's say you just want to have kick and snare and overheads. So this is how you could do it. So, but I don't have Contact. I don't work with it too much. But basically, you just need to activate it within Contact, and you may have to load up the instance with the right number of outputs, and maybe other people use Contact could, give a little more insight with that. Okay. Okay, so seeing Pinder says finally got Cubase 10.5, yippee, that's great. And that's another thing that there's still the promotion going on until July 28th, so you get a 40% discount off upgrading, or if you're buying Cubase for the first time, buying Cubase Artist, basically getting Cubase Pro free. Okay. So take advantage of that. So question from Pinder on the MIDI drum performance. I understand no drummer can hit a snare and a cymbal at exactly the same time. So to emulate this, one would nudge forward either, 1 or 2. Any workarounds? Well, I think, drummers can definitely hit snares and cymbals at the same time. So that's generally not so much of an issue. It's hitting three things with arms. That could be the tricky part. But, you have one arm for cymbal, one arm for snare if you wanted to. So, but let's say if I just, let's just activate this, and let's say we'll just play this particular pattern here. We can show a couple of drum editing patterns. So if you wanted to slightly nudge different parts in the drum editor, I will just come here, and I'm just gonna have Cubase automatically create the drum map for the instrument. And now when we click, we could see some of our different drum parts that if you needed to nudge, different elements so that they're not exactly the same. So a lot of times you may have, like maybe a hi-hat or a kick or a snare. Often you may have like a kick and crash at the same time. So if we come here, so if I just wanted to, so, if you have, your different sources here, what you're able to do is if you wanted to offset them just a little bit, you could see kind of what the actual position of the event is. So say you want the kick here. So if you select the kick, you could see kind of the start time. And if you wanted to just have that offset just a little bit, you could just simply, come directly here and change, excuse me, change the start time of the cymbal. So you could do little stuff like that. A lot of times it's, it's not so much of a hassle to actually, have, drum events occur at the same time. Could be a little tighter. A lot of drummers kind of aspire to having, their limbs strike at the same time. So, but you could just easily nudge and just kind of select based on the value here. If you have this also, there's a nudge palette you could use as well. So you may have to just activate the nudge palette, and then you could say, I want this to be down to a 64th note. So let's say I want, or 128th note, and now you could select an event here and just kind of nudge. Just hold down, your different nudge values here, and you could have it nudge based on the quantize value. So you could just easily kind of nudge different elements as well. Okay, part 2 for shortcuts to humanize is playing 16th notes in the bass pedal. Okay, so as if playing 16th notes in the bass pedal, is it possible to assign a function a keystroke that would lower every other 16th note? So if you come here, let's say if we have a series of, and I wanted to take, so let's say we have these, I think these will be set to 16th notes here. And I want to take every one of those notes and drop the velocity. We could do this in a logical editor. I'll probably have a brain cramp on this, but let's say I want to select every other note, and we'll set a context variable, I think, or we'll say last event. And we'll say event counter. And we'll say 2. And then what we want to do here is to take value 2, which is going to be the velocity of a note. And let's subtract 40. So if I did this right, we could take those selected notes here and every other one. Just drop the velocity. Let me just see if we... If we change this... And let me just see if I could say type value 1 is, we'll say A1. Okay, let's choose every other event. I'll choose value 2. Let me just see, I may have to do this in... So I just think let's try every other event. Event counter 2. Let's see. So it's something like that. I'll probably right after the hangout happens. Let me just see if I could. Just try one more thing, but I always have mine just set up as a preset. I'm just having kind of a brain cramp, but you could do that, and I'll just see if I could revisit that a little bit later in a hangout. But I know I did a Q&A on the logical editor that I use that specific example, so you could see it there as well. All right, so let's move on. Hi, Greg. Hope you are doing well. Do we have an electric Stratocaster lead guitar in 10.5 or Hallion 5 arsenal that can run through Cubase amps to get Hendrix Rocks blues emulation? It's very hard for normal guitar players to sound like Hendrix. So, there's going to be different. Let me see if I could just find like a lead guitar type of sound here. But it's probably pretty difficult to have a specific lead guitar that would have the touch and nuance and being able to kind of do that in the MIDI domain. But you could get great sounds. Let's see if there's just let me unsolo this and we'll see if there's So, I mean, with that, you could probably run that through some more different effects like the VST amp rack. So if you wanted to take, I don't think it's going to give you exactly Jimi Hendrix. And, I don't think most people could play it with the same exact instruments that he has and the same amps. So it's pretty hard to get all the subtle nuance, especially kind of getting all the expressiveness in MIDI. Okay. Okay, so can you tell me how to map an automation lane, say CC01, to an external physical fader or MIDI fader, say in Lemur? Thanks. So let's say, can you tell me how to map an automation lane, say CC01, to an external physical fader? So most of the time you could figure out what exactly the MIDI is transmitting. So if we come here, like if you see from your Lemur, let's say if you have, so I'll just go to this MIDI track and we'll come over here to your MIDI inserts. So if you wanted to remap the controllers, all you'd have to do is we'll just come over here and you can go to like a MIDI monitor. So let's say I move, the particular knob here. So this is controller. I move this knob. It's controller 32. So what I want to do is you could set up, if you needed to transform whatever MIDI message this is into modulation, we could go to the input transformer and we could choose it to be local, activate it, and say you wanted to take MIDI continuous, we're going to say type is equal to MIDI controller, and you want to take value 1 of that controller and let's say subtract 31. So this is going to take my MIDI CC32, and then as I move it, it's going to change it into MIDI CC1. So if that's what you want to do, so you want to map an automation lane, say CC01 to an external physical fader, MIDI fader. So yeah, that should be able to kind of transmit that. But if that's not what you want to do with your lemur, I know sometimes I don't work with that, so I'm not totally familiar with the workflows, but that's how you could kind of remap the incoming CC messages. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. Want to ask a question, 1 or 2. Group channel, group parallel processing for all of my audio tracks. Let me just see if it's continued. Okay, so if we have a number of tracks, let's say you want to, so it's kind of a 2-part question. Okay, just sorry, my timeline jumped. Okay. So 10 tracks of audio. I make a sound effects group channel, group parallel processing for all of my tracks. Okay, so to do this easily, let me just kind of jump over to another project here where you could have this set up. Okay, so let's say I want to take all of my drums here and route it to a group, a parallel group, and a send effect. So I'm going to just select all of these and hold down I'll just hold down the top and bottom with the shift key. I can then right click and say, let's add a group channel to the selected channel. So I'll say, let's make this a stereo bus. And what I want to do is we'll name this drum bus. Okay, so now my bus is created. And if I wanted to, at this point, create an effect send for all these tracks, just right click in the track list here and choose add track. And let's add an effects track to the selected channels. So let's just add a reverb. So now, and when I go to my sends here, I could just have more or less reverb. So say I'll do obnoxious snare reverb. And if I wanted to select all of the tracks again and add a parallel, all I'd have to do is come right over here, and I could, or I don't even have to select it. I could just say, let's add, right click in the mix console. Let's add a group track, and we'll make it stereo as well. And I'm going to select all of these tracks, go to my sends. I'll hold down Alt or Option plus Shift, and that will turn on quick link mode. I will now add these to group 2. I'll turn this on so this, and now they could all go to both. So I have my parallel path set up here, my effect send. And if I wanted to do some heavy-handed parallel compression, and kind of just blend these two together, you just do it on my group channel instead. Sorry. So now I could just have my parallel groups here. So that's just my normal. This is my parallel group. And if I want to add more of the reverb, so that's some easy ways to kind of get that configured for you. Okay. Okay, and then we have so let's say 2 of 2 question from Daniel. How to quick export all each audio tracks using channel batch export. What's the checkbox and not? The result I want is only 10 audio tracks with effects colored character from channel batch export. There's a number of ways to do it. One way is to just, come directly here. So let's say if I want to take all these tracks, I could go to my export audio mixdown, and then you choose multiple, and I can say now I wanted to export all of my audio channels and let's say my effects channels. And I could save it to another file, and this will take, even if I have these all kind of cut up, and this will make equal length stem files of your project. If you wanted just a single file, like I want to take my stereo out like a mix down, or if I wanted to now come over here, we could render the FX channels separately. And if you wanted to do the audio channels, and this will print the audio channels dry in a separate effects channel. If you wanted to actually embed the effects into parts, so if we have our stereo effects, I could just simply come here and we could choose, I will do just a select all of my drum tracks, and I could do a render in place. So we could just say, let's render, go to our render settings, and here we can say, let's do the complete signal path. And then if you wanted to, you could just say, we'll do the complete signal path. And you could remove the source tracks or disable the source tracks, and you could just say render. And this will take each of the tracks with their effects, EQs, basically embedded in them. So since we have stereo effects, it's going to take this and now make them into, stereo tracks. So each of these would be rendered with the effects kind of burned into the files themselves. So we can see that like right here, we're going to have this stereo mix down of all of the different files. And just for time expediency, I'll just abort. But that's how you could just simply do that with, so there's 2 different methods of being able to do that. And you could also have it just replace the tracks as well. So the original tracks, aren't muted or disabled. So you could do that. Okay, so hi, Greg. I'm nervously pacing in my studio. What do you think of the odds of me making the grace period for Spectral Layers Pro 7 upgrade, teased for August release with my purchase date of July 18th? If I was to speculate, and I don't know the exact date of release of Spectral Layers, but I would say that you're pretty good for qualifying for the grace period. So I think you may find out next week. So, all right. All right, so we have people checking in from Sweden. All right, Pennsylvania. All right, so hi, Greg from Oslo, Norway. I have a hybrid 2-track with Arpeggiator. How can I extract the notes from the Arpeggiator to the track for editing? The Arpeggiator is in the hybrid 2 synth. So not all, I don't have the hybrid track. So I don't, not all instruments are able to take the arpeggiated export out. So, if we have an instrument like we see here in VST instruments, it's really up to the instrument itself. So let's say if I have like a Hallion Sonic, all right, so let's say if I have a Hallion Sonic part here and we load up a patch. Let me just see, I think. And some of these will have, when we go into the MIDI editor, can get into like where we have the, different, let's just say if we come to our MIDI effects here, and where we could have like a flex phraser, a flex phraser component. So let me just see if this has one. But can allow you to just kind of, be able to draw in those different and be able to kind of drag and drop different flex phraser samples. So, sometimes that is automatically done with the instrument itself, where you could just, like we saw before. Let me just see if we can. So, but it's really kind of up to the instrument and how the instrument handles that. So it could be, and let me just see if there's, yeah, so, some of them will have like a little MIDI icon that you can just drag and drop, like the arpeggiators, like we could do, if we have a pattern in Groove Agent. So let me just load up a Groove Agent because I know where to find this quickly. So if we have, a kit with patterns here, we could just drag the patterns onto it, and it's really just a feature of the instrument. So there may be just, a pattern that you could just drag and drop like that, and it's really up to the instrument and how it's implemented. Not all instruments will feature that. So just so you know. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so we have Amir checking in from Iran. All right, so we have Barbados by New York. I got to vacation in Barbados about 7 years ago, so it was a lot of fun. Okay. All right, so we have Asheville, Romania, Austria, London. Gareth, I think, is checking in from Antarctica, so it's good. Okay, so we have, hi, Greg J. from New Haven, Connecticut. I don't know if my question earlier made it or got dumped. If so, I apologize. Could you please walk through setting up mixing for noobs like me, as my audio is all over the place with volume, even though I'm using VST and my sliders are at the same levels? So it's when you're kind of mixing, just because we have volume set up. So let's say if I take this particular part and we solo this, I could have really high volumes, but if all of the velocities in the event are really low, so let's say if I come here, and I will just select kind of all of my notes, and we'll take the velocity. So let's say we do that. sometimes, it may not matter what the mix is. So when you go to your mix, if all of your velocities on MIDI parts are really low, this fader, if you could crank it all the way up, it's not going to change necessarily the dynamics of that instrument. If you have also like different event volumes, so if I look at a particular part and let's say I cut this and I go to my clip gain and this is really low, adjusting my bass louder here won't necessarily compensate for that. So, those are some things as a newbie, as you indicate that, I would kind of look into. So, just having the faders kind of all set loud, there could be other gain structure things. So, if you want to send me a project or a screenshot of your project, I may be able to kind of look at it. But, make sure that, other things with VSTs is, you could have, if you were working with VSTs, you could have, the audio for the instrument, but that could be independent. So let's say if we're playing this drum set here, and I'll just put this in a loop. But if I go to my instrument itself, so I'll come here and there could be volume levels within the instrument that don't correlate to this. So if the instrument volume is down and you have this cranked all the way up, that may not get you the gain. So there's, figure out exactly where your volume is probably being attenuated, or, because sometimes an instrument could have the instrument volume, the mixer for that instrument's volume, in addition to MIDI volume CC7 messages. So make sure that you don't have any of those conflicting, and then I think it'll probably make sense, and you could have kind of a more typical gain structure once you figure out, where, which of the three volumes you want to use. Okay, so let's move on. All right, so we have Nash from Kenya, from Nairobi. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so I see a question. 10.5 Pro. I was trying to detect tempo as per your jazz group example, and the command was grayed out. What did I do wrong? Should I detect hit points first? So I think probably, when it's grayed out, it means that there's nothing selected to do tempo detection on. So let's go ahead and open up just a quick project here. So I'll have, let's say I have nothing selected to do tempo detection on. Now I go to my project menu, and tempo detection is grayed out. As soon as an element is selected, then it becomes available to use. So I think you probably just need you're one mouse click away from happiness. So just make sure that you have the event selected, and now you could go to tempo detection and it'll become available. So you don't need to do any hit point detection first. All right, so we have Malta and Scotland. Let's see. All right, my chat field jumped on me, so let me just... Okay, just scrolling back, trying to make sure. Okay, so I think I'm right back. Okay, so I just see a question. It bugs me that activate metronome always starts a bar earlier, as one bar is the minimum you can choose. So I resort to using punch in and punch out instead with pre-count. So I see. All right. So the point Pinder's making is, as it bugs me, activate metronome always starts a bar earlier, as one bar is the minimum you can choose. So I resort to using punch in and punch out with a pre-count. So I think a lot of people, you could do that, but a lot of people are tracking, like, of all the tracking sessions I've done of many in sessions, I think if I gave someone 2 beats as a count in, or 1 beat as a count in, that could be a little offsetting for them. Minimum I've heard is 1 measure of a pre-count, or if you wanted to do 2 measures is pretty common as well. So, but if you needed it to be, less than a bar, you can definitely use the pre-roll like you're doing. But I never had anyone ask me for 1 beat count in, or 2 beat count in, or 3 beats. So, okay. So question, is it possible to display filter overlapped audio events in Cubase Pro 10.5? Okay. So let's say if I have these events here and they're overlapping, I think if we go to edit, and maybe under functions, if you don't want to see it, like you could, it might be under preferences. So go to editing, and then you could choose delete overlaps. I think it's just going to be under. So now if we come over here and choose delete overlaps, now you won't see the other event. So, and as you would, move an event over, it would just automatically delete it. So let me know if that's, so that would filter kind of your overlapped value. So again, just go to under your preferences to editing and choose delete overlaps. And I think that will allow you to do what you want to. All right, so we have people from New Jersey and Helsinki, Finland. Okay, so question, can you cover some of the new features in Cubase 10.5 Pro? Just upgrade it. So one of the things that's helpful, let me jump back to a different project here. One is you can now have the mix console is colorized based on the channel faders. So you could see kind of that carry over. There's going to be, there's kind of a whole wealth of new functions. There's going to be new video handling, including exporting of video, some new plugins, probably the most comprehensive delay plugin that's ever been conceived by anyone. It's very incredibly German in a good way. So let me just come here. I'll just add an effect track. It's called the multi-tap delay. So we'll come over here. The name is a bit demure for what it's capable of doing, but if you want to go to your multi-tap delay, we could have, up to 8 taps. You could have different delay characters that you want to, and as you do this, each delay, you could have effects on a delay. You could do ducking in a delay. You could have, different time. You could do different taps. So if you wanted to do, different effects on your delay. So if you want to have another delay to create kind of feedback loops or phaser, now each tap could have its own effects that are independent per tap, plus, and you could have up to 8 taps. So you play around with that for like really ethereal stuff. A really useful function is like I wanted to come here and let's say in my kick track, I'll select this and you can go to the EQ and you can have kind of comparison mixing. So you can say I wanted to compare this with the bass. So as you play, you could say I wanted to see the EQ of the bass. So if I want to take the kick and then switch to the bass to make sure that these two frequencies and just go back and forth between two different channels. The EQ has been cleaned up pretty significantly. There's going to be a brand new version of Pad Shop. So you'll have Pad Shop 2, which will give you, a dual oscillator. You could also just drag and drop your own samples directly into it. So you can have, amazing sound design capabilities there. So there's kind of, there's probably about 150-ish new features or so. But those are some of the highlights, and I'm sure I'm missing a bunch of like amazing, great ones. But yeah, there's, it's a pretty amazing update for what you get. So. Okay, so let's just see. I'm on Pro 10.5 Windows. I was mixing in mono by using the insert stereo enhancer and stereo out, clicking on the mono choice in the plugin, but smarter to use the control room mono choice right for main. Yeah, I think it makes more sense to, as you're doing this, to just say, I want to take this, and go to your control room, and you'll see down mix presets, and just listen to it in mono. So stereo and just do your mono mix. And this way, if you put it on your master fader, it's really easy, like when you do your final mixdown file, to have it maybe engaged in mono. And then it's like, well, why does my mixdown sound, very center, So it's, if you throw it in the control room or use the control room functionality, at that point, it won't end up on your final export. So I think it makes more sense to do it at the control room level. Okay, good to see Alan from New Jersey in the Hangout. All right, so we have someone checking in from Hamburg. All right, so seeing Jazz Dude mentioning in Contact, you have to activate your special separated outputs first. Thank you for the insight, Jazz Dude. So just see a question. Could you make an in-depth video about sample management best practices for getting the most out of Media Bay? So I will put that on my list of things to do a video on. So and we could post it in the Q&A series if you want. Okay. So I just see a question from Peter Lawson. Bro, can we get your email? You can send emails to me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. Okay, and Agent K. And if you, as Agent K replied already, but if you also include your email address, that's helpful for if it's something I could just answer quickly, because it kind of gets forwarded to me in a weird way where I don't have, it doesn't show the sender's email to me, so. Okay, so we have a question. What is the recommended dB level in the master fader of a mix? It can really depend. A lot of people shoot for like -6. It depends if you're considering, if you're sending it to mastering or not. A lot of people like to aim for -12 or -6, and if they're sending off to mastering, because the mastering engineer gives them a little bit of headroom to work with and kind of, add dynamics. If you're kind of doing it yourself, I know a lot of people just try to get, -0.1 on their limiter and try to get it as hot as possible. And it really kind of depends where you're sending it, so you could run into situations if you're doing for broadcast, you may want to actually do an analysis of your file and, have it for -23 loudness units. So you could come over here to different metering options, and there's kind of dedicated loudness unit metering. If you want it to be streamed on Spotify, you probably want it for like the range of -14 loudness units. So those are kind of, different areas you can aim at, and it's still, no real standard. So, but if it sounds good, and it's okay if people have to turn their volume up, when they listen to your track. Okay, so I see, how would you mix voiceover and music together, as almost all radio ad is music and voice together? A common trick that people do is just to do, like, especially in radio stuff, is, just to do some quick ducking. So let's say we have, like in this project, maybe, like, let's say this is our music bed. And I wanted to let me just add, I think I have some voice tracks here. Okay, so let's say I have...
So Scott Dixon joining us now.
All right, so let's say I just have this going on, and I want this backing track every time that... And let me just split it up a little bit here. So we'll set up like a compressor for side chaining on like our bed track, because advertisers probably want their actual story to be heard. So let's say
moved from that group of 3, which was a...
So let's say I want
Scott
basically
Dixon joining us now, and
the audio to jump down in volume as the dialogue or the voice track comes in. So I'm gonna come to this particular track, and we're going to put just a compressor on it, and we'll show kind of an extreme example. So I will go to Dynamics. So I'll put just a heavy compressor, and I'm going to activate the side chain here in the compressor. And now I'm going to choose, I want the side chain to come from this particular track. So we'll hear the music.
So Scott Dixon joining us now.
Then when this track comes in, it gets side chained down.
See, I interviewed you in Victory Lane for SportsCenter just moments after you'd won the race in the championship. So I asked you a question then that you weren't ready to answer, but I'm going to ask you now. Then we had a little wow. Which is, I look at this list of all-time open wheel champions, and
so as the voice track comes in, the music bed goes down. And this is often used in like dialogue tracks in films. In the 80s, I saw a lot of people do this on snare drums, when like the big, huge snare drum was meant to kind of drown out the rest of the band. just so the snare could sit on top, to kind of get, and the kick and snare could sit on top. People would just do like some, creative side chaining like that, but that's pretty common for doing like, radio ad music. Okay, so let's just move on. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay, so you see, is Cubase able to recognize the tone of a song by analyzing audio or MIDI? So if you have a MIDI part, I'll just go ahead and I'll just import tracks from a project here quickly. All right, hang on. I may have to go get something for my son. I'll be right back. All right, sorry for the interruption. So I'll go ahead and just import a quick vocal and the piano part. Okay, so what we could do if you wanted to look at the MIDI piano part, we could, if you wanted to figure out what the tones are of the song, is go to your project menu and go to chord track, and you can say create chord symbols, and that will automatically create the chord symbols based on the musical performance there. As far as working with audio, we could do for monophonic sources, like working with vocals. So within the Very Audio tool, so we could do kind of an analysis of our voice, our vocal part here. And I will just select the Very Audio, and now we could see kind of the tonal characteristics and what pitches they are, kind of like editing MIDI. So that's some of the things that you could do with that. So for analyzing audio or MIDI. So it's not going to do polyphonic audio like chords or piano parts or a full mix. So just seeing a comment that I love the drum editor. So I think it is a very powerful editor. Okay, so it says I'd never heard of the grace period free upgrade. Very nice surprise, upgrading from C10 Pro to C10.5. Yeah, so how it kind of works is, if you bought this software within a month of release of a new version, they generally, your license will automatically be updated to the to the latest version. So. So see question. Hey Greg, is there a way I can create a strumming effect from the logical editor? There's some easier ways to do it. So let's say if I'll just add a instrument track here really quick. We can show you a couple of things. So you don't necessarily have to use the logical editor for this. So let's just add an instrument track here, and I'll just put on. And what I'm going to do is just kind of drag some of these chord tracks down, and this will kind of give us block chords. But yeah, like a lot of times what you could do, and let me just join these together quickly. I'll just grab my glue gun. One tool that a lot of people miss in the MIDI key editor for doing this is just using this tool. And you could do stuff like, I just want to take the beginning or the end of notes and be able to just kind of split them like so. So if you have, let's say, just, like these notes here, you wanted to go to the trim tool, and you could just say, I wanted to do that. Or I think if you hold down the Alt key, you could just kind of do, some different strumming patterns. And if we split notes, so experiment with this, and you could do a lot of different strumming patterns as well for notes. I've seen people also, once they have a strum done, is they could just go to, if you have a particular strum pattern that you like, you could also go to like the MIDI insert effects. So, and one of the inserts that you could do is the Arpeggiator SX. And this would allow you to take a sequence. So if you have kind of like one little kind of guitar strumming pattern, is just to kind of take that and drag it into the sequence, and then you could just trigger different guitar patterns like that. Okay. Okay, it says, I'm trying to make my own kits in Groove Agent 5, the full edition. When I close a kit and reopen it, the trigger keys on the pads are all over the place. How do I get them to stick to where I programmed them? Okay, so let's go ahead and just open this up quickly. Okay, so we'll have our Groove Agent, and let me just drop some pads on here. All right, and let's just put a couple snares in. Okay, so let's say if I change these particular notes, and one thing to check is if you've changed the note, make sure that this is kind of active. So let's say if I wanted to take this particular note here and let me just make it E3, and this we'll make F3. Okay, so, but try to, when you do that, and if you've reassigned the mapping, try to just come here. And if you've assigned it like I did, try to make sure that you have that enabled, the drum mapping, because that would change it doing that. So if you don't have that turned on, you see how this will still be C#1 and D#1, but when I turn this on, that changes to E3. So just what I assigned it. So make sure that you have that turned on if you've, depending how you've reassigned the pitch numbers. Okay. So question, I think a humanized slider would serve better to trigger the velocities. So if you wanted to kind of do humanizing of velocities or kind of randomizing, if you go to your MIDI modifiers, here you could choose, you want to randomize velocity between, 50 and 80. So you could have that kind of randomized function directly applied to, various pitches, velocities, lengths, or position of notes. Hi, Greg. Thanks for the video. Have you used a Reason Rack as an instrument in Cubase? Do you know how to use the MIDI out from Reason Rack to control other instruments in Cubase? I don't have a license of Reason. I haven't used it in years. We used to do distribution of it in the early days when it was first launched. But I haven't worked with the Reason Rack. But maybe someone else could chime in and help Scott if they're using Reason Rack with it, with their setup. Okay, so you just see a comment. Hey, Greg, I figured out my issue I had with my content samples from Steinberg not showing. Wound up making a video to show how to fix it on my YouTube. Couldn't have done it without you. Thanks. Also, I gave you props for your help and the hangout. Thank you for that. I'm glad you got it working. I learned the solution because I ran into the same problem. So, but I'm glad that worked out for you. If send me a link to the video. I'll make sure to like the video for you. If you want to email me at clubcubase at steinberg.de, but I'm glad that did the trick. Okay, looking for best practices to export my raw tracks for someone to import into another DAW from another vendor. I think the easiest way to do it is using the batch export. If we have tracks that are edited or tracks that are edited, so where we have, maybe different tracks will be coming in and out at different times. We want to make it kind of, a term I often use, we want to make it as Homer Simpson friendly as possible. So that, you could do well in life by making it really hard for someone else to screw up when you're kind of collaborating or exchanging files with them. So if you have, edits applied, and let's say it looks something like this, where you may have holes in different parts. So what I would do is just go to your file menu, and you wanted to make this again so that all of your parts that you've assembled, that someone could just load in equal length audio files at on different tracks is just go to your export to audio mix down. You can set your left and right locators around the events. So just hit like Command or Control A. You want to select all your events. In the channel export, just come over here, hit multiple, and then select all of your audio channels, all of your virtual instrument channels if needed. I will just create a new project, and we'll see how long this will take. So I'll just say export audio. It'll go through each track, bounce each track, and make it into independent files that will all be the equal length. And you can see there's our files that will automatically be created so that they could just, anyone using any program could start, could go over, turn on their program, start all the files at the same time, and that would automatically just play back the files for you without any worries. So that's the easiest way to do it. Okay. Okay, let me just go through different comments and getting lots of phone calls coming in today. Okay. Okay, so. All right, good to see Michael Teams from Weatherford, Texas on Hangout. So thanks, Greg. That's helpful. Also, is it possible for this, getting back to our question about maybe remapping a MIDI CC to CC01? Is it possible for an automation lane CO1 to output to an external motorized fader so that the fader moves when there's data on a Cubase automation lane? So you could do that. A lot of MIDI faders aren't motorized, but if your control surface or your MIDI fader box is motorized and it responds to, a lot of MIDI fader boxes only kind of transmit the MIDI CC messages. So, but they don't, while the instrument receives it, the MIDI fader unit may not receive it, but Cubase is sending that MIDI information out to the track. So if the control surface or controller is set up to receive that, it will automatically move the device. So I've seen some devices do that, some, expensive MIDI CC boxes. I think JL Cooper has one that some composers I know use. And I believe that will reflect any of the CC changes on a physical fader, but most of them, I think probably 98% only transmit but don't receive. And a lot of MIDI fader devices aren't necessarily, and I realize that you may be using it with Lemur, but it may not be able, it's transmitting that information. You may have to send it to the particular track and maybe in like a MIDI send also, or duplicate that track or extract the MIDI CC and send it to a different port. So if you do that, so let's say if you needed to do that, if we add a instrument track, I'll just choose no instrument here quickly, and if you wanted to copy MIDI CC1 to a different track to route it to a different MIDI port, you could just come over here and just say, so let's say we have mod. Okay. And then should be better at this with the logical editor. You could choose to, let's say, copy, or I could just choose extract. So I have MIDI CC1 there, and if I just say we're going to extract type is equal to MIDI controller, our MIDI controller value is 1. So now when I do this, we should see this MIDI CC data extracted from that part and paste it probably into a brand new part. So it was up here, and now we could have just a separate track. So you could copy that if you needed to. But most MIDI devices that transmit MIDI CCs don't receive them in the same way. Okay, question. Can you just click and snip on a waveform with your mouse and move it around freely for timing issues to line up, say, guitar drums with the arrangement window, not editor? Yeah, of course you could do that. So let's show you how. So let's say, I wanted to... just come here. So if I wanted to snip, I could just hold down the Alt key. And then if you want to hold down, so like let's say you want this to be on a particular transient, you could just even hold down Control and Alt or Command Option or Alt Control. And then you could just kind of slip the contents within the file or just move it wherever you want. Just that easily. So without having to go into the sample editor. So just a quick question. Can you identify the tempo of a sample in Cubase? So I'll just do a new project. There's a couple different ways to do it. So if you want to, let's say I just have a... So if I want this, a lot of times, sample loops will have that determined in it. You can just okay, let's listen to it. So we'll count how many measures this is. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 4 measures and four times. So an easy way to do this is to if you go to the beat calculator, you could tap along with the tempo if you wanted to, or you could just say this is 16 beats and it will tell you what the tempo is. And if you want to insert that at the tempo track start, you could do that. And now the project, you could just have, so you could come over here, just kind of do different, you could, if you wanted to, just hit your space bar and figure out what the tempo is like that, or just count how many beats it is. It'll determine the BPM for you of loops. So there's a couple easy ways of doing it. Here's a great comment from Millard Brown. It says, if I buy an air, it's probably in reference to someone wanting to have the Jimi Hendrix sound from a sampler, and plugins. So if I buy a Eric Clapton Blackie replica, then play SRV licks through Jimmy in the Box, Will the Universe Turn Inside Out, Explode, or just be pretty much sound like me. So I remember, I was talking with Peter Frampton once, and he's like, 85% of it is, in your hands and in the fingers of his tone. And so, and he has good fingers. So, okay. Okay, I wanted to ask you, I can't import my personal collection of MIDI loop arpeggios in the chord pad pattern section. Displays only native MIDI loop, but they're all third-party ones. Know why? So, okay, so let's take a MIDI loop here. You may have to do it to the project window. So let's say if I have my chord pads here, let me find a MIDI loop. So say I have a MIDI loop here, I'll just drag in a couple MIDI loops. Okay, so now that I have a MIDI loop, we just, all right, bear with me just a second, let's do a quick MIDI reset. Okay, so if I have this MIDI pattern, I will, let's go to my chord pad. So that's a MIDI loop. So I'll just choose. I just forget where they moved it. They moved this in different versions. But I think once it's, if you drag directly from there, sorry, let me just see, having my brain cramp moment. Okay, so now we have patterns on. Okay, so let's say, So it looks like, if it's dragged onto here, that you could just drag and drop the MIDI part right on. So it may not be where you drag directly to here, but drag to the project window and then drag from the project window right there. And we can see that that pattern is preserved for you. Okay, let me just jump back. Thanks for all the great questions. If you've learned a new tip or trick, please feel free to like the video and to subscribe to the channel. So it says, hi, Greg, 10.5 is one long spinning beach ball. Tried booting without my UAD with no difference. Arc 7 is the only other third-party plugin. My setup is the same as 10.0, which works okay. Puzzled, waiting for 11. What I would do is try, if you're running into that, try to make sure that you could restart, hold down. I think you're on Mac. If not, you could hold down Command, Option, Shift, and hold that down when you start the program. And that way you could try to temporarily start the program. It's kind of will run the program in like a diagnostic mode. And you could try to run the program and just tell it to temporarily disable the current program preferences. And that'll probably take care of it for you, Ted. So, and I saw your email come through. I'll look at it after the Hangout. Okay, we have Bionic Steel saying hi. Hello back. Okay, so we have a question for Michael. Teams, Greg, having a problem with the drum editor window. When I open it, it takes over the entire screen. How do I resize it? When any place I click doesn't produce anything. So if you have the drum editor, let me just... So you could set a preference when you're here. So let's say if you're in your preferences, go to editors, and you could say double click, open, double click opens editor in a window, or double click opens editor in lower zone. So if it's overtaking everything, and you could try changing that to lower zone. So now when I come here, it will just automatically, when I double click on the sample or double click on the drum part, it will go directly to that event there. So I'll just create the drum map quickly. But if I have it going to kind of my window and it's a little big, you may have to kind of just grab the top part. If you grab maybe an edge, and if it's like beyond your borders, come here, and then you could just kind of grab the corner and resize the window. So you may have to just kind of grab like a top corner and drag that down, and then just kind of resize and until you get it to fit, and then you could maximize and it will fill the screen. So if you've gotten it too big in the past, you can just simply kind of truncate it a bit using those techniques, Michael. See how that works for you. All right, we have people checking in from Holland. I think I don't want to say your name is Rude, but R-U-U-D, so I may be pronouncing it wrong. But thanks for saying hi. All right. Apparently, I am the milk again. I think it was kind of maybe a funny Spanglish thing from Gareth Gay a few hangouts ago. Okay, so a question from Bionic Steel. Hi, Greg. How do you limit your mixes in Cubase from being too bright or sharp? Hi-hat, for instance. It really kind of comes down to experience, I would use a lot of reference tracks, in your studio. So a lot of times when stuff is coming out as too bright or too sharp, uh, often it's indicative of maybe you're needing room treatment. Because the bass frequencies are probably collecting in a corner of your room, and you may need a bass trap because they could just be sitting in the back of the room, and you feel the bass. It seems like bass is there, and then you take it out of your control room, and all of a sudden the bass isn't there. So a lot of times when I see that, it's kind of indicative that your room that you're mixing in needs treatment. So it's kind of a classic thing where people aren't getting their low end right because their room is just kind of, almost regurgitating low end in the corners, like the back corners. So having something like a bass trap could make a big difference there. But check out other, load up a track and use it as a reference in your room and make sure that you're not dealing with it. You could try other, if you're doing a lot of processing on your master bus, I see lots of people, coming over here and, having 12 plugins on their master bus because they saw some video on YouTube and, made a huge difference. If you try to make it sound good without a lot of master processing, that's always a good place to be at. So if you're doing, a lot of times when I see people using so many plugins, they're almost fighting each other. It's kind of like the classic guitarist who has 52 pedals, and it's just a wall of, because they're running their signal through 52 different devices. And it's, and all those kind of fight against each other. But if, it kind of sounds like a classic, room treatment if your hi-hats are harsh because you're overcompensating those because you have too much low end in your room. So that's what I would kind of check, and it's probably not necessarily a software solution, but I would, and there's some solutions. I think a lot of people use SonarWorks, which is kind of like a room treatment plug-in that helps, but having a nicely treated room or kind of arranging furniture. That's why a lot of studios have couches. It's not only for comfort of the clients, but it's also a form of room treatment. A lot of studios have bookshelves because the books will be different, widths. And as you do that, you could have the sound kind of not hitting a flat wall. It'll just be hitting books that are different sizes, So those are some things that a lot of people do to get around some room treatment to help out. Okay. Okay, so I just see a question. Do you know how to change the grid to 1/32 in the drum editor? So when you come over here, all you had to do is kind of just slide. We see the snap value here. So if I have this set to quarter notes, as I go to paint in notes, it'll just be kind of at quarters. If I change this, if I have this to 16th notes, if I have this set to 32nd notes, so you could just kind of come here to the snap, and then you could set different rhythmic values. So you say, I want this to be quarter note triplet, so you could do it just like that. Okay, it says, hi, Greg, could you please show the top secret, let me see if I'm reading that right, top secret setting of how to bring a sound to Cubase 10.5 sampler and then have it mapped out over the keyboard, and how and where do we save this new sound? Thanks. So really all you have to do is, it's quite easy. So let's come here. I'll just go to loops and let's say I think I have like a single bass sample I use for this type of thing, like a Motown bass. So I will come here. Let's see, I have my volume down. So let's say I just play the sample. then I right click, create sampler track. And now at this point, and I just have my sample laid out for me right there. Now, if I wanted to always kind of play the same speed, I would just activate my audio warp. And that's all you have to do, you know, and then it's, you know, that's really, you could just, you know, so if you want it to come here, you know, you could do, and then you have your sampler track. So nothing really, you know, earth-shattering hard about it. No top secret thing. Okay, question. How do you remove a track? How do you remove from a track after working on it? So I'm not sure if this is just how to remove a track, but you could, if you wanted to come here, you could just right click and remove selected tracks. So, but Dilla, I think it's Dilla O'Neill. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. But just let me know if I'm misunderstanding. Okay. Okay, so seeing some more comments on the drum snap. So hopefully going through that. Okay, so I see a question. Why 32-bit VSTs are not supported now? Because pretty much all the operating systems are 64-bit based, and the 32-bit VSTs cause a lot of system instability. If you still need to run 32-bit VSTs, you could just purchase a bridging option like JBridge, but you know it's been 3 years, maybe almost 4, since we've discontinued 32-bit plugins. You know, so at some point, technologies kind of need to move on, and spending a lot of time doing quality assurance for, you know, plugins, which, you know, are kind of known to have issues, is, you know, we don't support DirectX plugins on Windows platform anymore as well for similar reasons. So, but if you wanted to get JBridge and still run some older 32-bit VSTs, that still works. And then, you know, but do realize that they do cause a lot of system instabilities. All right, so Pablo is explaining the, you know, saying that I am de leche is a compliment in Spanish. All right, so that's good to know. And as Pablo mentions, it doesn't quite translate to English in the same way. So, okay. So question: can you use the chord track to change several MIDI and audio at the same time simultaneously? You could do it for monophonic audio. So I'll show you an example here. I think I have a Bach piece which I like to murder periodically. Okay, so let's say we probably heard in different pieces of music. So here we'll have like the Bach's Brandenburg Concerto. So let's say, I'll turn that down to kill. All right, so, and I just did a quick chord analysis. So if I wanted to, I could place all these tracks, select all the tracks on the Bach piece here, and then, you know, just go to chords, and you want them to follow chords and scales. So you choose to just have it follow chords. Chords and scales are off. So I'm going to do chords and scale. So while we have very much a strong tonality of G major, I will come over here and I'm just going to select these two tracks here and let's put them on to G minor. Transpose that. And say right here, I wanted to go to like an E chord. So I could just kind of come in here and just kind of type in the chords and the MIDI will magically just follow. So if you need to come up with like a jingle that's very Bach-like, you know, you could just kind of change it very quickly and make it your own in just a matter of a couple minutes with the chord track. Okay, so I see they figured out the drum editor snap. Okay. Okay, so we have just a question. All right, sorry, my chat field jumped on me. All right, let me just scroll back. Bear with me just a second. Okay, I may have lost some questions. Sorry about that. Okay, so my chat field got overwhelmed. So let's say, so I see my Cubase 10.5 Pro is missing Hallion SE. Is it not included? It is included with the Hallion Sonic SE is included. So if you come over here to Instruments, and look under synths. So, you know, I'll just minimize all these. So if you look under synth, you'll see the Hallion Sonic SE listed here. If you don't see that, make sure that you installed from the complete installer. Yeah, and it's about a 21 gig download. So make sure that you do the complete installer. And not just like the update or like, you know, the 10, you know, just like the 10 to 10.5. So make sure you do the complete install, but it won't be Hallion SE. It's going to be Hallion Sonic SE, and it'll be found under synth when you go there. I see Agent K likes that's a t-shirt, one mouse click away from happiness. So I have to admit, I stole that from my friend Greg Lukens. So. Okay, so now we have Ohas, I believe, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, is discovering the drum editor. So. Okay. Okay, so a question: if I'm hard panning instruments, background vocals to make a vocal wider in each of the track in a mix session, treat it well in mixing session for panning, shall I use stereo expander in the mastering process? It could really just depend on the particular track. So if you have, I'll think I have a pretty open up one of my friend Clay Ostwald's projects. Let's see. I think I should have it. Yeah, okay, here. Clay generally does everything right, but we'll show you kind of like a big project with vocals and horns and different components panned throughout, like kind of a larger mix. So, when to use a stereo mastering, like a stereo widener. So let's say we'll go here to our spatial panner and say our stereo enhancer. Sometimes adding just a little bit of a touch can make a nice little subtle difference if you go too wide. And some people, so that'd be like kind of very mono. This is where we were. So that's probably a bit extreme. I think around there is kind of nice. We'll just so even if you've done hard panning, you could still benefit from having a little bit of stereo enhancing, and it's really just a personal preference. Some people I seem to, I've seen some of my friends kind of shy away from it, knowing that their projects are being listened to on phones or, like phone speakers or a mono iPad or like an Amazon Alexa device. That those different components sometimes, they tend to shy away from it, not find it, but you can definitely put it in. If it sounds good, it sounds good. That's the most important thing. There's no real rules whatsoever. Okay. Okay, so I see the same question about the MIDI chord pads, MIDI loops and the chord pads. Okay. Okay, so Sven Isaacson, tip last Hangout. Someone asked about changing from portrait to landscape mode in Score Editor. Cubase uses the system print setting, Mac OS. Go to File, Page, Setup, change the orientation to landscape. Thanks for sharing that. Okay. Okay, so I see a question. If I open up the media bay, everything is displayed and I can import them into Cubase project. But if I would like to load them from the chord pattern and personal MIDI file from collection, it is seen. Is it a limit of the chord pad? Okay, so we've gone over that. So so question, is there any way to make random automation like in Pro Tools? Random tool would be nice if humanizing sample hi-hat. If not, any plans to do this? So I think we could take, with, so let's say if we have, let me just import a quick sample. I'll just add a quick audio track here. So, you could definitely randomize velocities. So if it's just an audio file and automation, so let's say if I just have so one of the things with, automation is, the automation is going to be, let me just see if I could put it into virgin mode, but automation isn't tied to the event. But let me just, so, you could go through, let's just say, okay, I want to take this and I have virgin mode automation because, the automation, while it's associated with the event, it isn't part of the event. So, but you could obviously do randomized velocities, but let's say if I want to do this, maybe I'll to do something in the project logical editor. So we're going to say media type is equal to automation, and we want to, let's say, transform, and we could trim. So we could kind of apply like, multiple values, but, so if you want to just, if you have this sample, you could just, come over here, drop it into sample editor and randomize velocities. But, we could trim the automation. So it's, you can get the same thing done quite easily. Or even if you just drop it into Groove Agent, you could do stuff like that quite easily. Okay. Steinberg is taking it here with this plugin. Now dynamic frequency is missing, maybe for C11. I'm sure there's people that are always reading feature request in these Hangouts. So. Okay, we have Andres checking in from Switzerland. Always wanted to go there. Okay, seeing discussion of how people drive in Paris. Okay, so question, mono and stereo tracks can be exported at the same time. That is, keep what is mono, and what is stereo. So we can show you how to do this. So let's jump back to kind of a smaller project. So if I wanted to just do a quick export, let me just export a particular range. So if I wanted to export stereo and mono sources, so what I could do is go to my studio connections. So just go to my studio connections. I'm going to just set a mono output. It doesn't have to be routed anywhere. And then what I want to do is let's go to our mixer, and I'll just say I want all of my mono tracks to output to, let's say I want all my drums mono and everything else stereo. I will just route these to my mono output. So I'll hold down Alt Option plus Shift. And now I'll just do a quick export audio mix down. And we'll do a batch export. I'll choose all my audio tracks and we'll just put it into the same project. So we'll export our audio. And then as we do this, we'll see that my mono tracks are mono. Let's say if we go to our guitar tracks, they'll be stereo. So just set a mono output for the mono tracks and a stereo output for stereo tracks. All right, so we have South Africa checking in. So question, how can I export a single MIDI loop and not my whole project? So, you know, if you wanted to do a MIDI loop, which is, you know, different than a MIDI file, let's come over here. I'll just do new project, or we'll jump back to another one. So we have some MIDI tracks here. So if I wanted to take this, I could export. We just take this one particular part, and let's export this as a MIDI loop. And let me just, okay, I need to be on an instrument track. Here, just let me load up an instrument track here quickly. Okay, so if it's on an instrument track, I could take this here and choose to export. So just select it, and then I could export it as a MIDI loop, just that individual one. And let me see if I do an export MIDI file. It may just take the selected ones. Let me just try. Okay, let me import that MIDI file, see if it's everything in a project or just the one selected part. Forgot what I named it. Let me just MIDI file test MIDI. So, you know, if you want to do a MIDI file, you may have to come over here. I think you could probably just do a from edit, and then maybe if you select it, while you do this, let me just, there's probably, I think there's an invert selection. And then just delete, and then just export that one particular track. But if it's a MIDI loop, it will automatically be exported as a single event. But otherwise, if you wanted a MIDI file, just simply select it, do an invert selection, and then export a MIDI file. Okay, let me just go through. Okay, reading through comments. Okay, so I just see a comment from Dilla O'Neill. They need to add third-party plugin support for sidechain. So it works. Just the third-party plugin has to support it. So it's going to need to be VST3. So it needs to be a VST3 plugin, and it has to support sidechaining, but it works with third-party plugins. Not all third-party plugins, like a lot of UAD stuff, is still VST2. It's been almost, a long time. So third-party plugins are definitely supported with sidechaining. So, but make sure that your third-party plugin and make sure that they're running VST3 and that they have sidechaining in support in the plugin. Okay, so we have a question from Andres. Could I put track 1 and track 2 separately on my MIDI keyboard so that track 1 could be played with the right hand and track 2 with the left hand in the same time? So let's go ahead and set up that scenario. So we could do this kind of with the input transformer. So let's say I want a... All right, kind of cheesy organ, and let's say I want it piano. All right. So what you could do is set up a split point using the input transformer. Some of the instruments themselves will have this capability. So if you go to MIDI, you could say, only, you could set your instrument range here. So you could say, the low note on this particular instrument is only there. And so Hallion Sonic is a great device for that. But if you're using a lot of third-party content, it may not be as amenable to that or as simple. So you could set up an input transformer, and you could say, click on this little squiggly line, and you go to input transformer here, and you say you want to filter note messages. So let's say value 1, and we're going to say value. So we want to do filter notes, and we could say that are, let's say, bigger than C3. And we'll go to this one. So we look at that MIDI, we'll look at that input transformer again. Okay, so this is going to filter notes that are going to be bigger than C3, and we want to do basically the opposite with this input transformer. So make sure that you activate the module, and we want to say we're going to filter value 1 that is less than B2, or we'll just say C3. So now if I arm these two tracks, and I have, you could just simply have it set up just to do that type of function right there. So use the input transformer, or if you're doing it inside of, Hallion Sonic SE is just really simple to do there as well. Seeing that Jazz Dude is from Heidelberg. I got to go there one day as a little day trip from Frankfurt Music Fair in 1994. So loved going there. So it's a beautiful city. Okay, so seeing comment from Pinder, that compressor for dialogue was neat. Yeah, there's lots of great stuff you could do with side chaining. So I see I want from D-Stone, I want Cubase Pro so badly. It's a great time to get into it because of the update that's currently the promotion that's going on. So you can save 40% now. Okay. Okay, so I see, is there a way to change the ugly waveforms of audio files? Yeah, there's a number of different ways to change waveform display. So let's say, if I come here, let's look at this. So depending on the colors that you use, but there are different color schemes available. So if you go to your Cubase preferences, or we'll come over here and let's say if we go to, I think, event display audio. So if you want them to be, we'll just go through a couple. So if you want the waveform to be white, kind of like old vintage Sonic Solutions, you could do that. You could also just have different waveform intensities. So if you wanted to apply that as well, so you could come over here. Let's get to the middle. So, and there's also background color modulation, which is really handy for if you want to see kind of where the amplitude of different materials are. And one that was just kind of added back, we just is the, I think if we go to user interface, track and mix console, is you could have, I think it was, maybe it was under event display. But there's kind of like a transparent mode where I'm just blanking on. It's just added back into 10.52. Maybe it's back up here. But there's also a way where you could have kind of like transparent events. Let me just see. I'll take. But you see there's a number of different ways. Okay, this one here, the event handling opacity. So now if you wanted that to be kind of very bright, you could do that. But if we turn this all the way down, you could have it where you don't see any. So you could have, this way you don't see the parts. So if you're doing a lot of editing based on a grid, that's very helpful for doing that. So there's a lot of different ways to change the waveform display. how you want. So I'll just put this back to default values. You brought that one back. Michael Wagner was upset when that was removed. People thought that no one was using it. So, but he was, so we wanted to make Michael happy. All right. So those are a couple of the different things you could do to change waveform appearance. So let's just go back here to defaults as well. All right, so let's move on. Next question. Okay, so let's move on. So just reading through comments. Okay, so you see, hi Greg, how to use the MIDI gate with audio MIDI. So let's say if we have like this particular track going on. So let's say we have a drum loop going on. I'll just put this into a quick loop and let me set up a MIDI gate. So I can just go to my inserts and let's just set up under dynamics, I think. So we have MIDI gate. And I think I may just need to set up a particular track. And then we want this output to go to MIDI gate. So now when I just hit a MIDI note message, let's say I'm playing. We just come here. So say we play. As soon as I hit a MIDI note on, I release the MIDI note, it will play. I let go of the MIDI note, the gate. If I want to just, so the gate opens up when it receives a MIDI note message. And you could take another musical part and have that be the basis for opening up the gate. Let me just see if I... So what you want to do again, is instantiate it as a plugin and then add a MIDI track. And then you could just simply add the MIDI output to that gate. And then when you hit a note message, the gate opens and you could, have different settings here. But that's how you could work with the MIDI gate. Okay. Okay, just going through your different comments. And if you've learned something new, please feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Okay, so I see a question. Is there a way to set preferences to avoid having the input channel folder auto-populate every time you start a project or open an existing one? So I think it's really, so if we, just make sure I'm reading it right. So I think it really could depend on if it was saved. If you start off with a template, I believe that would do it. So let's say if I come here in my project, I'll just do a quick test to make sure. Let me just add a couple of input channels. Okay, and let's say I save this as a template. I want to hide these. And I will save as a template. And I will just save this project as well. And see if it's preserved with the project. So I will close the project and let me open the project. So activate this and we'll see if the inputs, so the inputs aren't showing once they're saved. And let's do our template. So do a new project and we'll go to our July 28th template. So it's not saved, you know, if you don't save it within the template or project, it seems like it won't show up. So I'm not sure. I'm just make sure that I think that's what you're getting at, Charles. But if not, just let me know. Okay, reading through comments. And see other people wanting to help out with the reason question in Cubase. It's always great. Okay, hi Greg, I use C Pro 10.5. I have lots of external gears routed by Dante and Cubase, external effects F4. Is there any save option for your external effects routing like there are for input and output? I just kind of had a discussion about this. So currently there isn't a way to save the audio connections, and it's probably the most critical one. So, you know, you could save presets for inputs, outputs, group, but not for external instruments or external effects for some reason. So, yeah, I just kind of had a discussion with some of the, you know, some of the product planning people about that as well. But there currently isn't a way, and I don't really have a good answer as to why there isn't. Okay, just reading through. Okay, so it says, hey, I'm using a Stream Deck for the hotkeys, etc., but on 10.5 it doesn't respond. On Cubase 10 it works all fine. I've used a profile manager. Any ideas what I could do? I have a Stream Deck, and I think I started building my template with 10 and then 10.5, and it just kind of automatically carried over. You know, the Stream Deck is basically triggering, you know, as you know, if you set it up, it's basically triggering all of your key commands. You know, so it's in essence triggering anything that has kind of assignable keyboard shortcuts that you could program into it. And if you're not familiar with the Stream Deck, it's just a little utility that a lot of people use for streaming, where you could have kind of, you know, user definable keyboard shortcuts. You can have keyboard shortcuts on this for different programs, and it's pretty slick, a nested folder architecture. But I would just make sure that, you know, you have, even though if you carried over your profile, your profile will include all of your key commands, but make sure that you have the key commands loaded and active here if you've changed them. So make sure that it's referring to the same key command profile as it is in 10. Also, when you start, one other thought is, when you start Cubase 10 or 10.5, you could assign it to, like when you start Cubase 10 that this starts, make sure that you have it set to when you start Cubase 10.5 as well, that, that the Stream Deck is associated with that. Okay. Okay, just reading through different comments. Okay, so we have people checking in from London. I'm seeing maybe some discussions about the routing of MIDI from Reason into Cubase. Okay, I don't have a copy of Reason, so wish I can see if I can get one. Okay, so I see a comment request. Greg, please tell Steinberg that users want to be able to more efficiently make any plugin work in dual mono. Yeah, I've passed that along from earlier Hangouts as well. So, but I'll try to reiterate it again. Okay, so a question, how do you turn on pre-fader metering to show input levels for gain staging? When you go to an audio track, all you have to do is, or go to the meter areas, just right click and scroll down, and you can see global meter settings, and you'll see meter position, set it to input. So once again, right click, scroll down, global meter settings to meter input, and set to input. So I'll just return mine to post fader, post panner. That's all you have to do. Okay, so it says, Greg, as I go around learning different parts of Nuendo, some things are confusing regarding surround, such as Dolby Atmos. Are there external hardware, software requirements to use Atmos? So let's go ahead and just fire up Nuendo here real quick. So, using Atmos, you're going to have, obviously an audio interface that's capable of with enough outputs. So probably, most people are using a 714 configuration is pretty typical. So, and you're going to need, speakers to do Atmos. So, when you start off in Nuendo, you can add an audio track, and we could choose that we want, the configuration here to be, let's say, 714. Okay. But you could also just say you wanted this to be, for, different, so you could choose kind of different configurations here as well. So you could just say, I wanted to do this, and as, so there's all sorts of different, metering configurations. So let's say you want to do, 714. And then you're going to need the speakers. So if you're doing Dolby Atmos mixing, you're going to have, your 3 speakers in the front. Often you'll need to have, most people have an LFE channel, your surround speakers, side speakers, and speakers above your above you for the height channels. So let's go to our audio connections here, and we'll set our output we'll add a bus, and we'll just say we want like a 714 bus, and we will route this track to our 714 bus. And then as you want to go into your multi-panner, you could just kind of pop right over here. Let's go into the VST multi-panner. And now when you start working with this, you have the option, to do all of your, different height and panning channels. So you will need a lot of speakers. You will need a lot of, audio outputs for that to work. And then you'll need to, export it, and use it, with probably like the Dolby software, the Dolby Atmos, renderer that they have as software. So it does take, a hardware investment to get started in it. It's not like where you have a, 2 speakers and can author and work in Atmos. Okay, let's just kind of move on. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. See, advice for me with my son: never show my son dinosaurs. All right. So he's not so into them. All right. Okay. All right. Just kind of going through different questions. All right. So I think, see, if you moved all your audio after you track them, starting at 4.1, and you move them to 12.1, can you change update at origin information in the audio pool to reflect 4.1? So let's say, the timestamp's not going to be based on measure or bars and beats and measure. It's going to be based on absolute time. But let's say if I have this audio file here, and I'll just render a new audio file. So there's a way to update the timestamp. Let me see if I can find it. So let's say I'm just going to bounce selection, and we'll create a brand new audio file. So when we look at our pool, we will see that this audio file has a particular timestamp. And we can see our origin time is generally going to be, let me just switch this to, it'll probably just reflect our seconds. So if I move it to seconds now, but generally origin time is going to be absolute time. So now go look at it in our pool window. We could see, right? Oh, didn't like that. Bear with me just a second. All right, bear with me to see if I could get my Mac sometimes with all my IT stuff I have for work. All right, I'm going to reboot my computer here really quick. So if you could bear with me just for about 2 or 3 minutes. So just hang on, and I'll be right back. All right, so let me just check, make sure I'm going to be back here. Hang on. I'm just going to do a quick audio check so I don't go 20 minutes without having audio. All right, so let me just, all right. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so so we were talking about updating kind of the timestamp of an audio file. So I'll just do a new audio recording. Okay, so we'll just do a quick audio recording of that. I'll punch out. So now when we come here, we could choose to move to origin. And it goes right back. But let's say if I wanted to undo that, let me just see where the you could just click right here on update origin. And now as I move the file, just kind of right click and we'll just say move to origin. So what you want to do is just on the audio menu, just when you have moved a file, just choose to update origin. Okay, so let's move onward. Okay, so let's see. Okay, it's not a question, so just reading through comments. Okay, so I see Michael Teams that are the editor. That was too big. We got that solved out. Okay, what's the fastest way to create hi-hat rolls at the MIDI note editor with different quantized settings? So I generally like to do this with in the drum editor. I find it, especially if you're doing hi-hat stuff, that will probably make more sense there. So let me just load up a quick kit. And just kind of like how we showed a little bit of the working with independent quantize earlier in the drum editor. Let me just check my connections here so you guys could hear my computer as well. All right. So we'll come here. Let's just go. I will just have it automatically detect my hi-hat for me. We'll create a quick drum map. So we'll create just kind of a blank part. I'll make it a little larger so it's easier to see. So let's say, okay, so if we kind of we see this snap here. So if I just wanted to put in eighth notes, I could just grab my drumstick, put in eighth notes. If I say now we wanted to put in, or that was 16th notes, let's say 32nd notes. And then we could shift this to 64th notes. Let's do 32nd triplets. To eighth note triplets. To 16th notes. So you could just kind of come here. So now when you listen to it, you could just do. So you could just, very easily just kind of have different values kind of drawn in for you just by changing the snap value as you work. Okay, so I see, why does Groove Agent 5 make your 10.5 crash when you introduce after recorded some audio tracks? So I don't think it's happened to me, but let's go ahead. So we have this. Let's record some audio tracks. So we'll just got recording here. So doesn't seem to cause problems, and I could open up the full Groove Agent 5. We'll see if that makes a difference. Okay, and I will take the same audio tracks. Arm and record. So, but if you have a consistent crash like that, you could try to reset the preferences, or if you want to, send me a crash log. It could be other things that are causing it as well. So I see a nice comment from Millard Brown's like, "Woo, I only have 51 pedals for your guitar rig." Yeah, so that's good. Other people commenting that they found Sonar Works worth the money. Okay. Okay, so we have a question. How do you make your own MIDI chord progressions that could be used in other songs, like MIDI packs? You could probably, I don't use a lot of MIDI packs, but I'm sure you could use the chord track for this. So let's say if I just wanted to... I'll just add a quick instrument track below this. So I think a lot of the MIDI packs are probably just going to be, I'm not sure if they're just MIDI files, but let's go ahead and... Okay, so let's say if we have that, I think what you could do is just drag these down, and that will make, just um, kind of just chords. So I'm not sure. So that is a way of making your own MIDI progressions that could be exported to other things. So, but if I'm not sure, if that's what's kind of people are using for MIDI packs, but that's kind of an easy way of doing that. Okay, just going through more comments here. Okay, just seeing Michael Teams telling people to whack the like button, so it's always good. Okay, I have my timeline and my chat field just jump, so let me just... Just scroll back here, get where we were. Okay, so found my spot. Sorry about that. Are there any shortcuts to change the quantize, or do I have to set them by myself? So I think you could set them, but I think there's also they're kind of. I think there may be another way that's kind of hidden. Let's do a quick search. So, but you could obviously set them. It used to be that the quantized values were set with like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, but they switched those to tools within SX. So let me just... So I'll just do a quick search. Sorry, let's have a rainstorm coming. I turned my lamp on, so let me just see if we could. I want to say it's maybe under insert. Let me just... So here's where you could actually set the quantize value. Let me just see if it's maybe in set insert length. This is what I was looking for. So option 1, option 2. So I think this is for maybe the score editor, but you could set it up just under the quantize presets. Okay, so it says question. Hi, Greg. To use East-West QL symphonic choirs, I need to insert CC21 into a MIDI track to hold a syllable over multiple notes. Is there any shortcut or macro I could use to insert CC121 at cursor position? All right, so let's see. I mean, you could probably do it with an expression map, but let's see if we could. do a logical editor. Let's insert. So let's say type is equal to controller. And value 1 is 21. So let's see if we can get this into part. And let's take a look in the list editor. Okay, so let's say if I go here. And let me see if I need to put a value to. Maybe. And I know some people will often, like sometimes with different orchestral libraries, they may come over here to a MIDI part, and I think if we get to the MIDI inserts, sometimes using, I think if you go to MIDI control, you could say you want to insert a value of, let's say CC21, and let's see if we could change the position of it. And at this point, sometimes you may be able to, I had this not work with the freeze MIDI modifiers with that particular plugin. Let's take a look in the list editor. Yeah, I could play around with it some more if you want to email me and kind of work on it. But you may have to kind of enter it in. It's kind of an odd controller number to work with. But, you know, if you have a MIDI controller that could hit a button, you know, that could do it as well. And obviously Cubase will capture that. And you may be able to assign, you know, a particular MIDI button on a controller to transmit CC21 for that as well. Let me see. I'll just try just really quickly through a generic remote. I don't think that would work, but let me just try. You know, or I'll try with a input transformer. I'll play around with it some more if you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. Peter, sorry about that. Just see a comment that's Hallion string sounding like that. If this was going back to the Brandenburg Concerto, that's the Hallion Symphonic Orchestra. So that's a $99 add-on, or comes with the, also comes in the Absolute 4. So So I see a question. Hi, Greg. Do you know if Cubase intends to improve expression maps editor soon? It's such a great feature, but such a pain to program as it is now. I think it never evolved from the beginning. Thanks. I haven't heard of any development plans. A lot often they don't really share a lot of stuff with me too early because they know I talk to lots of people. But I haven't heard of anything. So. Question: can you explain why so many hip-hop trap producers are producing in double time instead of normal time? For example, they use 140 beats per minute instead of 70 beats per minute. I can't really explain it other than, maybe it feels like, I think a lot of times, you hear different genres, represented by, they have to be, like dubstep has to be this tempo range, or once you get to 180 it's this tempo, it's this type of music. So I think that's how people kind of perceive the tempos. A lot of times, people think that they need to start at a specific tempo to be within a genre. So I think that's what leads to that a lot of times. So we see, how can I tell which Hallion samples have articulations? So one of the ones that, an easy way to do it is, let's say if I come over here to a Hallion patch, you'll see often kind of the, the extension VX. So a lot of the orchestral stuff will have it, as you load it up, for stuff, a lot of stuff that you would expect, like, if you go to different strings, orchestral things, those will have a lot of, articulations as expected. But you could also just, come over here and say, go to all and look for VX. And generally, like, a lot of the ones that have VX in it for some of the smaller libraries may have articulations built in. So that's a good way. But, it depends on how people build it as well. I don't think there's a filter necessarily search for things that have, articulations on it. So. Okay, we see Sir Robert checking in from Atlanta. Good to see you on the Hangout. And someone else mentioning about the double tempo because double time clicking gives you more inner beats and feels more like a hi-hat pattern. So question, do you need to run the metronome in outputs? If I run in the control room monitors, it makes no sound. There's a couple of different ways to where the tempo can, so if we just hit C, I could see the tempo here. A lot of times people may get to the point where you go to the control room and then the click could be turned all the way down, but the click could still be enabled. And you may not notice this, and you may have to click on the main because it's at the very bottom. There's nothing to click to go up. So if you click on the main, you may have to adjust the click volume there. So if you're not hearing the click volume, even though it's turned on in the control room, click on the main to make sure that these settings are visible, and then you could adjust the click volume there. So if you're not hearing it, it could be just a simple matter of doing that. Okay, so just seeing, how can you set up a MIDI controller without an interface to play over a sample drum track. So, so let's say if I start off with a loop, just close this project here. Let's do new project. Okay, so it's going to drag this over. Okay, so I'll just put this into musical mode so we can have that kind of fit. And, if I wanted to now just start playing different bass over that. So make sure I'm understanding the question before I go too far with this. So let's say. Okay, so okay, so how do you set up a MIDI controller without an interface to play over a sampled drum track? So, here I have a sample drum track, like a loop. So I have my MIDI controller has an interface in it. So if I just wanted to, record that, so just make sure I'm understanding, I could just kind of hit record. So, you could just record MIDI directly over top of that. But if I'm misunderstanding, just let me know. And I'm just seeing some more discussion about, people getting resolution. So let's say if you're at 80 beats a minute and you wanted to change the click to have higher resolution. So say we have the click on. Now I will just come here. I still have my click down from previous question. So if you wanted to get more of, like a different, if we kind of slide over here, you could see, different metronome patterns that you could have. So let's say I will just start with the signature track here, and we could do this from and we're 4/4. I could double click, and if you wanted to, have it be double tempo, you could do like this, and you could just have the click. So instead of like our traditional 4/4 pattern, so it's a so if we're here, so say that's our, and if I wanted to be double tempo, and you could also do, so you could have kind of different patterns, and if you wanted to make your own click patterns, you could do that quite easily as well. Okay, just reading through more comments. Okay, is there any way to make velocity more even? Sometimes I press the keys a little bit too soft or too hard. Yeah, there's a really clever trick. So let's say I wanted to look at the velocity here. I could actually just select the velocity range. So let's say I just wanted to come here. Let's say, let me just change this a little bit. So let's say I have like all my velocities a little too soft or a little too loud. So if I wanted to just select all of the notes, so I'll just come here, just hit Control A. If you go to the side, we can now just kind of regulate the velocities to kind of bring them more in line. And then once you do that, if you go to the upper center, you could bring them all up or down. And if you wanted to tilt, so if you wanted to take like a velocity curve pattern and have it tilt, you could do that as well. But just go to the right center edge and you could kind of expand or compress the velocities to make them, fall in line, make them a little more consistent, but still musical. Okay, just reading through more comments. Thanks for all the great discussion. Okay, just still reading. Question: can I get in trouble with VST presets and samples loops I bought when I used them for commercial purposes? Sorry for my bad English. I'm sure whatever language you speak, me speaking that language would be much worse than your English. So any of this Steinberg content is all royalty free. So you could feel free to use it in any project, and if you make a gazillion dollars with it, you don't have any worries. So all the licensing for the content is content free. Hang on just one second. My son's knocking on the door. Okay, I'm back. Sorry for the interruption. Okay. Okay, it says, hi from Denmark. My MIDI controller doesn't go in my VST instrument. If it go into Cubase and it work in standalone VST mode, but not VST in Cubase, 10.5 Pro, not on channel 1, or all MIDI in. So make sure that one thing that could be set, a preference, usually when I kind of get this question, go to editing, to MIDI, or go to MIDI here and make sure that MIDI through is active. And one way you could test to see if it's going to be your controller or Cubase setting is if you hit Alt or Option K, you could trigger a track, just a selected track using kind of your on-screen keyboard, and you could use like your computers. So you could use your on-screen computer keyboard. So you could just hit like Q number 1 or number 2, WERTY, so your QWERTY keyboard, and you could see if that's triggering that. And then you know that it's has an internal MIDI connection. Also, go to your MIDI inserts and then just click on MIDI monitor and see as you hit the notes if it's seeing MIDI data coming in. But it could be that could be coming in, and then if you still see the MIDI coming in here, but it's not going to the instrument, go to, again, your preferences to MIDI and make sure that MIDI through is checked. All right, so I just see in Cubase, do we have a MIDI glide option? So, it could really depend upon the instrument that you're using, but a lot of people will just do, will use something, like in the sampler track is like really good for having some glide options. So I'll come here. So I just have like in the sampler track loaded up, and you can put it into monophonic mode here. And then as you kind of hit, so once you play kind of legato, and you can set the glides rate right here. So if you wanted to kind of just play a little bit, you're going to be slower. Or a faster glide. Basically no glide. So that's a kind of an easy way of doing some glides using the sampler track. So but a lot of times, depending on the instrument, you could also just do portamento. Okay, reading through different comments. There's a lot of discussion. Okay, so I think Ambient Dave is checking out. It's late in UK. So I just see I update to Pro, and now Ozone is blacklisted. Make sure that you don't have, could be scanning older versions or VST2 or 32-bit versions. I just kind of went through this with someone on Facebook. It's like, you have to figure out what's wrong with, why Cubase is just doesn't allow me to use my ozone, and they just reinstalled and only installed the VST3 and everything was good. So but yeah, the isotope plugins have been notorious for being blacklisted, and often they're blacklisted for a reason. So just make sure you had the latest one, use the VST3 and 64-bit, and maybe just reinstall only the 64-bit VST3, and it tends to work for people. So see a comment, just try the MIDI loop thing. It's giving me a pop-up menu, not as an output option. So I'm not sure if that's just being able to save the MIDI loop. But anything that's an instrument track, you could just come over here. So, and because the instrument, a MIDI loop will export the MIDI information plus all the different what instrument sound is used to play that back correctly. So but maybe if you could reiterate what you want to do the MIDI loops. We've had it several times in the discussion. Okay. Okay, so it says at Cubase, sorry if this is a repeat, Greg, but I heard that you say that your comments scrolled out. It's that only reason I'm re-asking. Let's say part 1. So I don't see, it's from Count Montcastle. So I don't see, I'm kind of scrolling through. So I don't see the question. I know I did lose some when the kind of scrolled out, but if you want to try emailing me right now if you're still on, if you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, I'll see if I could catch the email before the hangout ends. Okay, yeah, so with the count about your Dolby Atmos, so we did cover that a little bit earlier. So okay, what to do when I can't right-click on the mouse and use Learn CC with third-party plugins? It does not work with every VST plugin. That's correct. So let's go ahead and let's say if I wanted to control a particular, so let's say on this bass patch, if I want to, so let's say I just wanted to control a plugin parameter for, let's say, maybe a filter or something. So I will come over here to, let's just add an insert track, an insert effect on this. So let's say, I just wanted to control that filter, but there's no Learn CC. And I wanted to set this up with quick control. So set up, if you have a controller with 8 quick controls, with 8 faders on it, go to your studio setup and set those up and do a quick MIDI learn for all these so that you could do your quick controls. And all you have to do is we'll go to your quick controls, and I will just set this up so you could have it kind of automatically configured for different things, but you could also just, let me just come here, and I'm just going to go to the first slot, and I'm going to just click on Learn, and then I move this knob. That's automatically been assigned to the quick control slot, and now I move this particular sound, and as I play, I could just, and then you could control kind of the filter resonance, and let me just do it with an R1 because I may have that one doubly assigned. So, just come over here and let's say if I'll just start from scratch here. So turn this on. The frequency is now adjusted. Now when I play note, that's all you have to do. So just, set up your quick controls once and then, right click on a parameter, click on learn in the quick controllers, move the knob. That's automatically places it in the quick controls. And that's a really easy way to do it. And we can make a lot of sense and have a quick access to any parameter. Okay, just reading through great comments. Okay, so I just see a comment from Sir Robert. Glad they brought the waveform view. Didn't know it was back. So yeah, when customers get upset about something that they didn't think anyone was using, there's obviously people that use it and are very emotionally attached to it. So. Okay, so you see a question, how to pan individual MIDI notes in piano roll. So generally most instruments don't support this. Like, I don't know of really hardware instruments that support this, but if you wanted to, let me just, so let's say if I have, I'll just create a new part. But if it's like a VST 3.5 instrument, like Hallion, Pad Shop, Retrolog, Hallion Sonic SE, you could do it through what we call note expression. So if I come here, and even if I make these notes just overlapping, I'll come here. All right. So let's say I have these three notes. And let's say these are just overlapping as we do this. So So what I'm going to do is we'll make this a little larger so we can see all three notes. I'm going to go to note expression, and then we could go to panning. Now, the MIDI specification, as originally written, MIDI controllers like volume and panning are for the entire everything on the MIDI channel. So if you do like MIDI volume on drums, for instance, it could be, if you intend to just make the snare louder, and you have hi-hats and kicks on the same MIDI channel, that MIDI volume will change for everything. So I'm going to select, we're going to just come over here and just do panning. So I will double click and say, I want this note to be panned hard left. I want this note to be panned in the center. And we'll pan this note hard right. So I could take the same MIDI channel here, just double click, and you could actually kind of see these. I'll make them a little larger. And let's just make sure that we could let's see if I have the note expression data on here. So now we could see kind of the note expression data, and as we listen to it now, we can have this note. So now these instruments are panning independently. So in the center, down to the left. So that's how you can do it. So you could just double click on a note, and then if you wanted this to kind of go from left to right, you could set that up as well. Just turn my snap off. So if I wanted this note to transition, we could do that as well. So now we have left, right. So that's how you could have individual note panning in the key editor. So. Okay, so lots of discussion on different orchestral libraries going on in the chat. Okay, so can you show example of using chord track with mono audio if stereo isn't possible? So you could do a stereo track, but it's monophonic, meaning that it's going to be more, like not chord playing one note at a time. So sorry for the confusion on that, but let's come back over here. So let's say I have my drums and bass going on. So I'm going to add a chord track. So first you need to come over here and do an analysis of like in Very Audio to figure out what the pitches are. And I just want the bass. I don't want the drums to follow the chords. So I'm going to say, let's go to chords and scales. And we can say follow directly. And as I come here, so let's say we'll start off. And right at this point, I'll just activate my snap. I want it to be key of D. And let's make this E. So you can see that the notes will just kind of change as we do this. So let's say I want that to be a B. I'll just come here. And now so that way the bass line is following, but I didn't tell the drums to follow. So that's how you can do it with like not a polyphonic, but a monophonic part. So, and again, it's monophonic as opposed to mono versus stereo. So. So I just see, can we show a particular scale in the piano roll? So, there's a couple of different approaches. So let's say if I have a MIDI part, and if we go to the chord editing, here I think we could just choose I'm going to set a a scale. So I could come over here. There's a couple ways to approach it. So let's say I add a chord track. I'll activate this project. That would be helpful. So say I'll just make it D. I will say, okay, we're going to make it into D major. And let me just... one of the ways to do it is you could actually colorize based on chord track. So red notes are out of key, and then, blue notes are in the scale, green notes are within the chord that's been defined from the chord track. So you could, visually see everything there. Now you could also just select different events, and, if you played in a bunch of bum notes, I could say, and go to MIDI, and we'll say transpose setup, and I want it to be in D major, and I could I could just say, make everything fall within D major if you wanted to. So there's, different ways of doing it based on, where you could see the color of that. And as you record notes in, you could also just come to the input transformer and say, I only want to, so you could say, I just want to do type is equal to note, and we could say value 1, and you could, set to, different scales in the input transformer. But doing the colors, I think, is a great way of being able to do that as well. Okay, so let's, we had a question. I think we may have done this before, but I'll just do it one more time. So let's say we start recording at measure 12. So let's say I record something. So this is about the update origin time. So let's come here. I'm going to add an audio track. I record. And so right now, when we look at our pool window, we see our origin time for that particular file is set there. And let's say if I move it down to, let's say, measure 12-ish, and I click update origin, and then I look in my pool window, we'll see our origin time is being updated. So just select, after you move the file, just click on audio update origin. Okay, just going through more chat. Thanks for all the great questions. Okay, so I see from Oren, good to see you on the Hangout, Oren. I just upgraded to UR22 Mark II. Now I can get any of my saved projects to open from Cubase 10.5 and down. I get the message to say file on found. Do I want to keep it or remove? Any advice? So generally it's like, updating the UR22 shouldn't make that. So, I could, Oren, if you want to give me a call tomorrow morning, we could maybe go over that. I don't think it's going to be related to your UR22. But if you want to reach out to me later or send me an email, we could set up a time and do a quick remote or take a look at the message. If you want to email me a screenshot or take a picture on your phone and send it to me, feel free to do that. Okay. Okay, so I see just thanks for the help with the stream deck. Worked out fine. Good to hear that. So I see just comment, hello Greg, trying to connect now on friend on. So not sure what friend on is, but I also see, hi Grego, when do you use detect hit points? So, a lot of times I'll do hit point detection. Like if I have a drum loop and I want to maybe extract the feel of it. So let's say if I really liked the feel of this particular drum beat. So I kind of like the addition of the click pattern there. All right, but not intentional. So if I wanted to take that and maybe have that feel and have my MIDI lock up to it, or what I could do is go to my hit point detection. So I go to hit points. I will come right over here and we'll find kind of the rhythmically significant points of the audio file, like so. And then what I could do, you could do a lot of things. I could create warp markers based on that, but I could also create, MIDI notes. So if I wanted to do like drum replacement, like if I had a kick drum or snare drum and I wanted to sample, I could create MIDI notes, but I could also create a groove. And now if I really like that particular groove, I click create groove. When I go to my quantize panel, it just shows up right there. So I could apply the feel of that particular drum loop to other MIDI stuff. So, there's a lot of stuff you could do. You could also just come over here, and when you go to the hit points, so let's say when we're in the sample editor, you could also, create slices. And then you have the ability of, if you wanted this to be quantized, I could just take those and say, I want this to be quantized to, straight eighth notes. I could select those and then hit the letter Q, and that could adjust the rhythmic timing of the loop from where we were. So those are some of the things they could do with hit point detection. So. So I just see a question from Alec. Can you make decent music, various genres with Cubase Pro 10.5 and recording equipment? I have lots of material. Kai MPK 261, SM7B 57, UR824, but haven't found time to get into it yet. Yeah, there's pretty much infinite possibilities with what you could do. So it's just really, coming up with the ideas and taking the time to do it. So, there's really, just, get into it and spend some time. You have some great gear, jump in and have fun. Okay, so I see Hello, Greg. VST performer error, cannot load ASIO driver. HN4 is connected using Windows 8, which is okay with Steinberg downloads. So, make sure that, if you have the VST performer, make sure that they have up-to-date drivers for everything. So, if it's not loading the ASIO driver, make sure that that the customer isn't just using a generic Windows driver, or if they're on PC, make sure that they actually have the ASIO driver, and you should see it in the VST Connect Performer. So when I come over here, like I have like a UR22 set up. So let's say if I will go to like a VST Connect scenario. So I'll jump over here. Let's activate this quickly. Okay, so now I kind of have, just turn that off so I don't have my bass plugged in. But, if you're not, so when you come here to the VST Connect editor, sorry, I have this closed, but, you should be able, when you go into, their settings, for, if that's not showing up as, your ASIO driver, like here we could see that we're going to use, so let's say the performer. So here, if that's not showing up directly there, make sure that, they could run the ASIO driver on their system. If it's not working as on their system, that would kind of give you maybe an indication that, let me just turn that off, that it's not, capable. Maybe it doesn't, their driver doesn't work on Windows 8. So, a couple things to check out. I don't have a Windows 8 to test. I do have an HN4, but I don't have any Windows 8 machines. But, if it's not, if it's saying it can't find the ASIO driver, it could be being used by another program. Maybe they have it as their default onboard audio interface, and they have to turn that off and route their onboard audio somewhere else, and it's not sharing. So there could be a couple of different things that could cause that to happen. So, all right, so let's move on. Okay, so so I just see, how can you get to Melodyne to print to your audio to free up May CPU? So if you're running Melodyne as a, sorry about that. Let me just exit it out, unfortunately. So, if you're running it as a plugin, you could just simply, render the file as a plugin. If you're running it inside of Cubase, if you're running inside of Cubase Pro, what you could do is, if you're running it as an ARA2 extension, so I'll just kind of pop over here. Sorry, I'm having some bizarre issues today, so let's So if you're running it as an ARA2 extension and you wanted to free up the processing power, what you would need to do is after you've done the editing is just to commit the edits is just choose audio bounce selection, and then you could unload the Melodyne. Okay, let me just scroll back in time here. My chat session jumped again. So question, can I use the tutorials that are for Cubase for Nuendo? So everything in Cubase currently is in Nuendo except for VST Transit. So yeah, they're all applicable. So just the question, I've been trying to use markers for mastering sessions. Is there any way to get the markers to snap with other markers without it being related to a grid? So let's say if I have, let me just go to a project here quickly. Where I could just drop some markers in. So let's add a marker track here. And I'll just go ahead and drop some in. You know, one thing to be aware of that a lot of people, and so it says for mastering, is there any way to get the markers to snap with other markers without it? So I think if we just select these, so now if I wanted these, you know, one of the things that people often don't realize is that the markers could be based on the time base for marker tracks can be musical mode or linear mode. So now if I, you know, move these markers, they don't necessarily snap to the grid, but they could be freely placed anywhere. So if I'm misunderstanding or if there's, you know, just let me know if there's another application for that. Okay, question. Could you give us some tips for working inside the MIDI editor? All right, so let's take a look at. Just open up a quick MIDI project. Okay, so, you know, one of the things that's often helpful is, you know, being able, you know, for what a lot of composers, you know, really like is the ability of seeing multiple, you know, lanes here for different articulations, and these could be resized. So if you wanted to see, you know, mod and let's say expression for doing different orchestral stuff, you know, you could see all these different parts here. So let's just draw some in. I'll take my snap off. And being able to see some of the velocity control. So if you wanted to take this again, As we select different parts, being able to kind of tilt velocities are really handy. So being able to sculpt them, coming here and being able to use the arrow keys to jump up and down. You could also, if you hold down shift, go up and down by octaves by doing that. If you have notes that are stacked on top of each other, one handy thing is to be able to come here. Like, let's say if I have a chord, and I look at the velocities and I only see the velocities all stacked on top of each other. If you hold down Command or Control Shift, you can come directly here and just adjust the velocity of the selected note. So you can just have different velocities within chords. Being able to resize notes is very handy as well. So you can do it on all selected notes. If you wanted to select all the notes in the same pitch, we could just double click and hold down shift, and you could select all the notes that are on the same pitch. We also had a question. We had one question mailed in about using the arranger track and being able to export files that had different arranger tracks on them. So if you have the arranger track, and this allows you to set up like different parts of the arrangement. So let's say if I just add a quick arranger track and I wanted to come here and say this is my verse, intro, bridge, guitar solo, whatever you want, and you can have nested parts within parts and create kind of your own arranger chain. So, the question was before exporting, if it made sense if you had to flatten the chain to kind of take the non-linear arrangement into the linear arrangement. And that's the best thing to do if you wanted to export within the arranger track, is to flatten. You could save it as a new project and then just simply do the render there. We also had a question in the last Hangout where someone wanted to figure out a way of selecting all the tracks within a particular folder track. And I came up with a macro. Let's see if I can get it if I can find it. So we'll open up this project here. So I'm going to select the folder, and I have the folder open. And the concept was someone wanted to have the folder and select all the tracks within the folder. So I played with it. So let's say I made a macro, select all tracks in folder here. That would do that. And what the macro is, we'll open it up. It's just kind of 3 steps. Is we just set it up to project, folding, unfold tracks. And I'll just kind of leave this up. Channel and track visibility agents. We want to show only within the selected channels. We wanted to then do a process or project logical editor of selecting all tracks. And then we could go back to undo the visibility change so that all the tracks will show up. So, and with that, I know we've gone about 3 hours and 57 minutes. I want to thank everyone for all the great questions. This is really a fun hangout to do. As always, I appreciate everyone's help and great discussion. We want everyone to please stay safe and healthy. If you want to, if you've learned something new today, make sure that you hit the thumbs up button. So you like the video. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you do that. We'll do another hangout this upcoming Friday. We'll try to have this indexed later tonight or early tomorrow morning. So with that, I want everyone to stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you guys on Friday. And please feel free to send questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. Thank you very much.